All right, folks, welcome. So today what we're going to be doing is we're going to be taking a standard Mil-Spec trigger on an AR and we're going to lighten it up. All right, so here's a few of the items that you're going to want to have on hand. Some kind of a trigger pull scale, even a basic one. This one's pretty cheap, but it works up to 8 pounds. A non-marring mallet, and I'm going to be using an armorer's stone to stone the trigger components. It's probably around 4,000 grit if I had to guess. Not 100% sure on that, but then you're also going to need a punch to remove the fire control group. This is a 5/32 punch. And then we're going to be installing a spring kit. This is a JP Enterprises reduced power spring kit. Alright, so just to give you a little idea of what areas we're going to be working on to improve this trigger a little bit, where the hammer and the sear engage, we're going to work on both of these surfaces here and here. We're also going to do a little bit of work up toward the top here where it engages with the disconnector, and we're going to work this both sides of this area here, and we're also going to work both sides of the disconnector a little bit. You can polish the top of your hammer up here. This is going to be engaging with your bolt carrier group. This is not going to affect your trigger pull, and it's also actually just going to polish itself over time if you put some rounds downrange. So this is the only spot really on the entire fire control group that I would ever use a power tool on. The goal when you're working these trigger components is to make sure that you don't change the geometry or the sharpness of these edges. These edges being nice and sharp and crisp is what will give you that nice kind of glass rod breaking trigger feel. So that's why you want to avoid power tools, because we don't want to round these edges out. We want to keep them nice and sharp. So basically what I'm going to do is I'm going to start right in here, and I'm going to keep this as flat as possible, and I'm just going to kind of work it back and forth. So we're starting to see a little bit over here, starting to see a nice little shine. See if we can bring that in a little bit more. If you're having a hard time keeping it straight and square, another way you can do it is just put it up on the edge of your workbench like this, and then just kind of hang this over like that. And just take your time. Go slow. Think of this as like a Bob Ross painting. Just making a little nice little happy shiny spots here and there. Not removing any real amount of metal. Just keeping it nice and smooth. Alright, let's see if we can get that in focus. There we go. Yeah. That's looking pretty nice. We don't want to go too crazy on this thing, so I am going to do a little bit right on the top here, just ever so slightly, and this will help kind of clean up any grittiness that might be there, residual grittiness. We want it nice and sharp. We're not going to go too crazy here. All I'm doing is just ever so slightly just kind of polishing that up. And we're done with that section. Now what we're going to do is we're just going to hit where it engages with the disconnector. So this part's a little tricky to get to. You can get in there like this and just very gently, we just want to smooth that out a little bit. Alright, so same deal, just polishing that surface a little bit, and we'll come in and do the top as well. This will help give you a nice clean reset. So again, we're not going too crazy on it, just giving it a little polish to take away that grittiness. Okay, and that's about as far as I'm going to go with my hammer. All right, now let's work on the actual trigger. So we've got two surfaces here that need to be worked. We've got the front of the sear and we've got the top. I want to be very careful not to mess up this nice sharp edge that I've got here. I want to keep that edge nice and sharp. Press firmly, and I'm just going to kind of back and forth, nice and flat. Keeping that completely flush. And continue to work this. Notice I'm using very small strokes. That's because I want to keep my finger downward pressure right over the top of this thing. If I use bigger strokes, my finger ends up way off on one side or the other, and then that downward pressure ends up causing it to tilt. Small movements are really the key to getting this just right. All right. Now I think that's enough for that surface. Now the next surface that we're going to want to hit is the front. Keeping that finger flat over the top of it. Just use small strokes and keep that in constant contact with that flat surface. We just want to make a nice razor sharp edge up there so that it breaks completely clean. So, see if I can get the reflection just right so you can see it. This top edge is just very nice and sharp and clean. All right, so once we're done with our trigger, we're going to move on to our disconnector. Okay, and I'm just going to very lightly do the top and bottom surface of the engagement points here. Not trying to go too overboard with this. Just wanted to give those nice little smooth surface. Okay, so now we're gonna install our springs. I'm gonna leave the stock Mil-Spec hammer spring on there just so that it can ignite pretty much everything. We're just gonna go ahead and swap this out. And we're going to install these three. Trigger spring first. I'm just going to kind of pop it on. There we go. And that's how we want it right there. Go ahead and do the hammer. Just kind of set it up like this. And we're just going to wrap it around. That's what you want it to look like when you get that on there. Now take your disconnector spring with the wide kind of fat side downward, and install it into your trigger, just like that. Alright, so before we start reinstalling, we've coated all of our trigger components with a nice light thin coat of Adigo Armory CLP. This will kind of help protect things, keep everything running smoothly in here. And we're going to start by installing the trigger first. Before I install the disconnector, I like to just kind of line up my pin. I'm going to go ahead and just drop my disconnector in. Alright, next thing I need to do is reinstall my safety. Alright, next we're going to install our hammer. I like to start my pin, my cross pin, in the hole just enough to where it holds it in place, and then you can also use your punch on the other side as a guide once you kind of get it in there to sort of hold everything in place. What you want to do is start off like this by placing these two ends of the spring on top of this lower trigger cross pin. So you're just going to set them in there, and you're going to make sure that they're on top. Make sure they don't slide under it. That'll also keep your cross pin in place. Got that kind of held in place. And give it a little bit of a little love tap here and kind of just jimmy this. I'll have to pull that out. There we go, and that is in. Let's check our trigger pull and see how we did. Alright, so that cut us down 1 pound on our trigger pull, so we're about 6.5, a fairly decent drop, but we're going to show what happens when we actually install the included hammer spring so that you can see a side-by-side comparison. So this, you can kind of tell by the sort of greenish yellow color that they add that this is not the stock spring, which there's the stock Mil-Spec spring right next to it. You see a difference in hue. Let's go ahead and install this and see where we're at. That dropped it down to 3.5 pounds. And once again, we are at spot on 3.5. So one thing I can note is the excellent consistency of this trigger. Again, I think I would primarily attribute that to keeping those edges real nice and sharp, and making sure that I'm not rounding anything out. There's no slop in this trigger. It's just a nice, sharp, clean, crisp braking trigger, and I think that you guys will be real happy with this setup if you don't want to dump $200 on an aftermarket trigger. If you like this video, please remember to like and subscribe, and thanks for visiting today.